And Chris Kirkey is with us now, Director of the Centre for the Study of Canada and Institute on Quebec Studies at SUNY Plattsburgh. Welcome. It's always good to see you.
Thank you, Tom.
You're originally from Cornwall, Ontario, not far from the capital of Ottawa, where we've been seeing much of this play out for the past 3 weeks. Let's begin with your thoughts on that. The Freedom Convoy that was mostly made up of truckers to start, protesting the new mandate that went into effect on both sides of the border, requiring truckers to be vaccinated. Started out with the truckers and then sort of grew into what it's become.
Right. It's frankly, it's a mess and has been a mess for 3 weeks. But I think it's, to the extent that when people may turn on their evening news and see trucks on Wellington Street in front of Parliament or on different streets in Ottawa and people outside, playing hockey on the street or having Tim Hortons or in a hot tub, they look at this as sort of, a series of spontaneous, uncoordinated events that you had a segment of the Canadian Trucking Association that had concerns about the need to be vaccinated, and they sort of took things into their hands and said, hey, we're going to go to Ottawa and protest. And clearly that's part of it. But what we've really begun to determine and what we've really begun to see very clearly, and the evidence is showing, is that this is not an uncoordinated, just sort of spontaneous series of activities. What this is very carefully calculated, very carefully orchestrated by a series of former law enforcement officials, former military officials, and more particularly a sizable group of 200 to 250 individuals in Ottawa who are associated with the alt-right in Canada and are on the very fringes of the conservative movement in Canada, who are determined not simply to make a spectacle of what's going on with these truckers and such, but they're really committed to not only seeing Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party out, but they'd really like to fundamentally overthrow the government of Canada. They're very much committed to that, and I think as much as as I say, the veneer has been focused on truckers' movement and the truckers' grievances, that's really not what's going on here. And quite honestly, when it became pretty apparent that this convoy, so-called convoy, was going to descend on Ottawa, these groups said, we've got our veneer, we've got our wedge issue here, we're going to build around this, and this is our opportunity to go in and really fundamentally try and see what we can do to change things in Ottawa. A number of hotels, for example, in downtown Ottawa, have entire floors that are occupied by command centers that are effectively, once again, controlling the activities of what's going on in the street. This is not just a bunch of people who are upset that Mr. Trudeau is saying if you want to be a trucker, you have to be vaccinated to cross to go to the United States or to come into Canada. That's not what's going on. And I think it's, in some respects, not that there's any neat parallel here, but when we think of what happened in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th, it seemed, yes, there may have been some incitement by the former president and this and that, but it seemed like, it's just a bunch of, protesters. There's a lot more planning, a lot more organization, and we're just now beginning to get some good news stories that are coming out by some dedicated journalists, particularly through the New York Times, Washington Post, Globe and Mail, who are sort of infiltrating these organizations, and they're effectively, to be honest with you, Tom, the single biggest surprise in all this is that there hasn't been any use of violence, any kind of an attempt to, harm, say, a member of Parliament or the Prime Minister or things of that nature. So this is a much more serious. As much as a guy like Sean Hannity on Fox Evening News will show Canadian truck drivers and say, this is all about freedom and, and not following government mandates. This is not what this is about. Yes, that element is there, but it's being supported by, and the bigger threat that exists is the threat to the Canadian society at large.
And is it being supported by the Conservative Party leaders in Ottawa? Just before the convoy started, of course, the party, Aaron O'Toole stepped down as the leader of the Conservative Party.
The Conservatives are rudderless right now, and in fact, in some respects, you can say they're performing a disgraceful act for Canada in the sense that they initially came out and said, yes, we're with the truckers and we're with all these, and we support the bloc and all this and that. And now the Conservative Party is saying, this blockade has to end. This sort of encampment on Wellington Street in front of the Parliament buildings, all these trucks have to go. We have to return to, normal life. But yet we support, your fundamental goals, and we think that Ottawa's wrong on the vaccine front in particular, and the way that they've approached this whole vaccination process. And that voice is really being lost in Canada right now. It's not resonating with anybody except rural, white, sort of nationalist, fiscal and social conservatives. And because quite honestly, public opinion polls are demonstrating that Canadians overwhelmingly are, to be blunt, sick and tired of what's going on in Ottawa and at various border crossings in Surrey, British Columbia, Coutts, Alberta, Emerson, Manitoba, the Ambassador Bridge between Windsor, Ontario and Detroit, Michigan. They're tired of this nonsense. And they're tired of the fact that Canadian political and law enforcement agencies have been unwilling to step up. As someone said to me in very straightforward terms the other day, there have been no consequences for these actions. And it's clear that Mr. Trudeau and the Minister of Defence and others have said that Canada will not use armed forces, but this needs to end.
Justin Trudeau, midweek, declared a national emergency.
He did.
Invoked the Emergencies Act, which I think a lot of people had never heard of before. Rarely used powers?
They're looking to eliminate blockades at places like, major cities like Ottawa, airports, border crossings. They're looking to make sure that, Canadian society sort of returns to normal. And what it does is it provides federal law enforcement officials with greater scope of maneuverability, greater flexibility, as it will for provincial, as opposed to just resting the responsibility on municipal officials. So.
And was it a step that Trudeau had to take in order to, for example, get the Ambassador Bridge cleared and open?
I think it was a smart step to take, quite honestly, given the gravity of the situation and given the fact that places like the Ambassador Bridge was, being hijacked, and it took the closure, if you will, the Ambassador Bridge for President Biden, who'd been watching this very interestingly, pick up the phone and say, "Hey, you've got to get this fixed, right?"
And we clearly saw the impact. I mean, within a few days,
it did. To the point that automobile manufacturers were chartering cargo planes to get their parts across the border back and forth. And let's be clear that period, particularly surrounding the Ambassador Bridge, was as inconvenient as it wasn't as serious, didn't do any serious harm to the Canadian-U.S. economy. But had it been protracted, had some person come and decided they wanted to explode a vehicle on the bridge, or somehow, then it would have been very serious.
What about Trudeau? Has it been one of the biggest crises, though, that he's faced as
For
Prime
Trudeau
Minister?
as Prime Minister, absolutely. Absolutely. But he doesn't really have to worry, I think, that in any way, shape, or form that it's going to prove perilous to his government's standing. He's taken the steps, as I've indicated, to suggest there will be no use of the armed forces. And Canadians are supportive of ending this. But I think he's safe right now.
Did you ever think you would see something like this in Canada, in Ottawa? Is this truly history in the making these past few weeks?
I think it is. And for me, what gives me pause is that, is this one and done? In other words, is there more to come? And what does that look like?
Chris Kirkey, always great to get your perspective on everything. Thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Tom, delighted to be with you. Thank you.